Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a breakdown of the image quality from this Irix 15mm f2.4 Blackstone lens. Now, if you watched my first episode, which if you missed it, you can see it here, I broke down the unique kind of design qualities of this lens and also gave you a little bit of familiarity with this brand that you may not have familiarity yet with. Now today, of course, we're going to jump in and to look at really what makes this lens tick. And while, I'm glad that it works fine as, when it comes to its mechanical performance, and I like the build and all of that, the look of the lens. But what, of course, I think is probably most important is how well that it performs. And while the last episode was somewhat unique to the Blackstone version of the lens, today's image quality breakdown will also be equally true of the Firefly version of the lens. And so if you're looking at the less expensive option, fortunately, optically, you're getting the same optical formula, the same lens, just in a different housing, slightly different features. And so today we're going to jump in and we're going to look at a variety of photos and a variety of settings, take a look at the resolution from the lens, its flare resistance, chromatic aberration control, distortion, vignette, color rendition, all of those things, and also do a comparison to kind of a one benchmark that I have on hand, which is Tamron's 15 to 30mm f2.8. And so obviously it doesn't have as wide of a maximum aperture, but it does have a similarly wide focal length on the wide end and a fairly similar maximum aperture. So it provides a pretty good comparison point. And also because I've owned this zoom lens for 3 or 4 years, I've been able to compare it to a lot of the new wide angle lenses. So it's a good benchmark for me personally because it's been compared to a lot of other lenses already. So let's jump in and let's take a look at these images together. Okay, so in this comparison, I have, just to give you a quick look at what I have done to these images, because this was a strongly backlit situation, I purposefully underexposed, and so just to give you a look at how the image would look just natively out of the camera. And so what I've done is I've brought the shadows back up a little bit, highlights down a little bit, and a bit more exposure back just to allow us to have as balanced a look as possible. I've applied equal settings across the board to all these images, and so that we can have as apples of apples as possible. Now in this particular comparison, first comparison, we're comparing wide open. So it's f2.5 to f2.8. Now as you can tell, the Tamron has a little bit brighter end result, but of course also shutter speed is significantly different. We will find that at equal shutter speeds, however, the Tamron does let a little bit more light through. But taking a look at this, we're more looking at our overall sharpness here. And so as we look out towards infinity here, one thing you can see is that both lenses, even at f2.8, 15mm, are quite sharp. And so you can see not a problem when it comes to that. However, at wide open, you will see there's a little bit more contrast and sharpness on the Tamron lens than there is on the Irix. Again, remember though, this is f2.5, actually f2.4. And let me just pause on that. The actual physical aperture opens up to f2.4. However, the standard third stop is at f2.5, that's what the camera ends up reporting. Now you can see that pretty close out to the edge, we still have some nice resolution from both lenses, from the Irix as well, even at f2.4 here. And the same is true over on this side of the frame. And so definitely some positives there in that you do have pretty good sharpness right off to the edge of the frame. Tamron being a little bit better, but not by a wide margin. I think mostly it's the wide open contrast that prefers the Tamron. Also, it vignettes a little bit less, as we're going to see more here in a second. Now here we have an apples to apples comparison at f2.8, identical shutter speeds, identical processing steps. And so as you can see, the Tamron does give you a brighter end result than does the Irix. Now with the Irix stopped down a little bit, let's see if there's much of a difference in terms of our both. Again, once again, subject looks good on both of them. I would say that colors are looking a little bit more vibrant on the Tamron, which is certainly a strength for it. And you know, micro contrast maybe slightly favors the Tamron. However, off here at the edge of the frame, I would say right off at the edge at f2.8 here, we're getting a little bit better result out of the Irix than we are out of the Tamron. If we look over at this side, I would say that the Tamron looks every bit as good. Looking down at this pile here, I think resolution is fairly similar, other than in this extreme corner, which looks a little more smeared here. But our biggest difference here is really more about vignette, and so you've got a brighter result off towards the edge. The actual resolution results are not terribly different. Now, one thing worth noting is that with both lenses at 15 millimeters, the framing from the Tamron is pretty close to identical to that of the Irix, and so not a major difference between the two lenses when it comes to that. Certainly not enough to be appreciated in any kind of real-world setting, from what I can tell at infinity here. A couple of other things to note. When it comes to the flare, obviously we've got the sun is right here in this frame, and so the sun is actually really bright in this scene. It's a strongly backlit scene. So this also allows us to look at some flare resistance. And so you do have this single ghosting artifact here on the Irix that we have seen already at other aperture values that will continue to be there. In terms of the epicenter here of the sun, not a whole lot of veiling. We can see that the Tamron actually veils a little bit heavier, and the Tamron also has a little bit more of a kind of a pattern of, you know, refractions that is taking place moving down into the image. Now, what the Irix does have, and we'll see this more in a few minutes, is that there is a very large circular ring that fortunately a lot of times is outside the frame. You know, the Tamron, we've got some veiling, a little bit of ghosting in there. So I would say that in some ways the flare resistance from the Irix is better than that of the Tamron, with one exception that I'll note in just a moment. Now, as far as the resolution, now that we're down to f4, once again, I would say that our center observations are true. It's really, the Tamron does a better job with the light transmission and the micro contrast, which allows it to have a little bit more kind of pop there in the center, difference between light and shadowed areas. The resolution, I would say, from both though is really strong and right out to the edge of the frame here. And so great news for this Irix lens is that, I mean, it really is sharp at landscape apertures. It is sharp from corner to corner. And I would say that now we're seeing an uptick in the contrast here at f4, and so I would say it's more competitive right out here to the edge of the frame. Only in the very extreme corners is there a little bit of a difference for the Tamron lens. Now at f5.6, our general observations remain similar. A little bit brighter image from the Tamron. Once again, we've got this, you know, same kind of ghosting artifact that is not, you know, too terribly destructive here, and similar kind of pattern coming from the Tamron. Now, in terms again of sharpness and contrast, the lenses are looking fairly similar. The overall contrast does still favor the Tamron a little bit. And so, you know, just darker areas look a little bit darker, bright areas look a little bit brighter. In terms of raw resolution, both of these are delivering, I would say, pretty close to perfect levels at f5.6. Now, one of the things that I will note that you maybe can't see as strongly as you can in some of the comparisons that I've used, but the Tamron does have some issues with some lateral chromatic aberrations, and so you can see a little bit of both green and purple fringing showing up here. The Irix is better for that, and as you can see, because the lens is stopped down, lateral CA doesn't really clear up from stopping a lens down, and so it's there on the Tamron, and you can see again some of that green and purple fringing, you know, kind of top and bottom of things. That's not there on the Irix. So Irix is a little bit better when it comes to chromatic aberration control, and now we can see, I mean, both of them just look brilliantly sharp at f5.6. So just a very quick peek here at f8, and you know, most of the things we've been observing continue to be true here. I just wanted to give you a look again right out to the edge of the frame. Sharpness is very, very good on the Irix lens. It is performing just fabulously here at these kind of landscape aperture values. And once again, you can definitely see more of the general flare resistance when it comes to veiling, and so contrast is holding up better on the Irix lens here. So here's a look more just at veiling in general. We're going from f2.8 to f11. And so here you can see that, once again, as we've already been seeing, even when the lens is stopped all the way down to f11, you will start to see aperture blade shape, but you never really have an issue with a loss of contrast or that veiling. And overall it's not bad. But what you will see, depending on how your framing is, this kind of strongly pronounced red circular frame, depending on where the sun is. And as you can see, when the lens is stopped down, it actually becomes more definite here. And so at the f11 case, it's actually really, really strong. And so it will be important to just kind of be careful in the way that you compose. I would say that in most situations you can get by with very, very little impact from flare, but you will note that there is that circular ring. And so depending on how you are going to compose, I would just recommend making sure that this is not in the frame unless you want an artificial rainbow there. So we're going to take a quick look here at how vignette and distortion impacts the image. And so note that this is from a very close focus distance, and by the way, it's not even properly focused. This is about vignette and distortion, so we're not here to examine sharpness. And so at a very close distance, when distortion is going to be most exaggerated, you can see that really barrel distortion is still fairly mild here. There is a mild curvature here at a distance of no more than 4 feet away, and but even towards the bottom part of the image, it's less obvious there. And so really quite a good distortion performance here for a wide angle lens at such an extreme kind of closeness where that would be most exaggerated. For a lot of situations, this is not going to be a problem for you. At f2.4, you can see there is definitely some fairly strong vignette that comes into the frame. At f2.8, it is lifted considerably. At f4, you can see we're getting a much more even brightness across the frame. f5.6, there is a mild lift there that you can see. But now our illumination is getting quite equal across the frame. And moving to f8, it is only at the very extreme edges that you saw a very, very minor difference. And so toggling back to f5.6 and now back to f8, you can see it's a very minor difference between those two. Now here I wanted to just go back to flare for a moment and show you that we do have a nice sunburst effect, and so kind of in less extreme conditions and using the flare, and I often like to do this, I like to put the sun somewhere through trees or something similar and allow a nice kind of sunburst effect just to add one more visual piece to an image. So what you can see here is nice color rendition, very nice sharpness across this image, and this is just less for testing. This is more just to shoot. And so when you're actually shooting with the lens, I mean, that's a beautiful result. Once again, this is a Canon 5D Mark IV. Just a really nice end result there. Here's another image that I share mostly about color, and so I mean this is heading towards twilight, a nice kind of color time of day, but you can see that the image itself, this was a handheld image, that we have really nice looking color throughout the frame. And so Irix has done a good job with this. We can also see, looking up at these wires, they're nice and defined, not really any kind of longitudinal chromatic aberrations that are messing those up. And so I look at that and I see a very nice wide angle result, something that a few years ago very few lenses could accomplish. Here's another handheld landscape image, and so you can see once again very beautiful color rendition on display, and and then also great detail and definition, both in our foreground rocks and then as we look off towards the far shoreline. While it's obviously very distant, the details have not gone mushy there, and so good. It's a good end result. Now, how about Coma performance? So here we have at wide open f2.4. Obviously, one thing that I will really praise here is that I talked about in my first episode about that detent for infinity. It makes it really, really simple to go out and shoot star-based images. I mean, literally you click to that intent and it is perfectly calibrated for shooting stars. The only way that you would vary from that is if you were in really, really extreme conditions, and that's why it has a little extra play beyond that if you want to move towards there. So, I mean, end result is that it's easy to get nice crisp star points, and so looking at the image globally, it's fine. Everything looks nice and crisp. If we look off to the edges of the frame, there is some coma that is present there. You can see kind of some wings that are developing on some of these star points. These are not, in fact, winged stars, but that is some coma taking place, and these are not flying saucers. That is coma that you are seeing there. And so it does suffer some from coma, but at the same time, I wouldn't hesitate to use this for shooting the night sky either. Now, of course, most lenses are requiring you to start at f2.8, and so we do see an advantage here in that in both cases I did a 15-second exposure, but in one I was able to use a lower ISO setting. And so yes, it's not a full stop of difference, and so this would probably have benefited from being a little bit higher in ISO, but they're not terribly different. And so what you can see there is an advantage to having the wider f2.4 maximum aperture to draw upon, in that there is a slightly cleaner result here than the ISO 3200. Now, in terms of the center of the frame, a very minor uptick in terms of the sharpness of the star points. What I'm more concerned with here is there any kind of significant improvement if you stop down to f2.8, you know, kind of where most of the competitors are playing at? And the answer is no. I mean, the coma performance is basically identical. I wanted to share one other coma kind of result test, and this is more about highlighting the f2.4 maximum aperture versus f2.8. So if you use identical settings, we've got a 15-second exposure at ISO 3200 here. I would say that I prefer the f2.4 on a global level. I mean, obviously you're gathering in a fair bit more light, so the star points are brighter. There's more kind of definition in the cosmic dust of the Milky Way that you can see. If we look at the images kind of at a pixel level, there is a very, very minor uptick in the sharpness of the star points, but that's not really going to be seen much unless you're at a kind of a global, or I should say a pixel level, because looking at them globally, I don't know that one looks any sharper than the other, or if you're looking at them at, blown up even more so. And so at the same time, I think that there certainly is an advantage of having a lens with a wider maximum aperture. And so if you can tolerate a little bit of coma in the edges of the frame, I would say that all told, you're getting a fairly nice Astro lens besides that. Now, I wanted to share one final image. I mean, obviously bokeh quality is less of a deal with a wide aperture lens, but this does give you an idea. You can see some of the flare kind of things that we saw there, but you can also see the bokeh circles here at f2.4. And so looking at some of these here at detail, you can see there's a little bit of busyness in the bokeh circles, but at the same time, as we go out towards defocus, I would say that I'm not seeing a lot of, really hard or ugly edges. And so this is relatively soft through this zone, and looking at the image globally, I think that looks pretty decent. I find a lot of positives in the takeaway of the performance from the Irix lens, particularly when you consider its price point, which is much more reasonable than competing lenses. And in a lot of ways, it's not far behind some of the very best performers that cost significantly more than what it does. And certainly if you're going to be shooting at traditional landscape apertures, you're going to find that it's a very sharp lens. It's going to produce very highly detailed images really all the way across the frame. So nothing to complain about there. And while it does exhibit a little bit of coma, it's actually a fairly nice lens to use for Astro, because in the dark, it's very easy because of that very smart detent at, kind of the hyperfocal infinity. It really enables you to very quickly and easily make sure that you're focused correctly for the stars, which I think in a lot of cases is going to end up giving you a better end result for Astro than what you might get even with a lens that has a little bit less coma. The nice thing too about such a wide focal length is that while there is some coma there, it occupies such a small portion of the frame that in many cases it's not going to be visible outside of a pixel level of examination. And so I think it's certainly a valid option, and the fact that it has a wider maximum aperture also helps it in that level as well. So yeah, a lot of positive things, and if you'll stay tuned in my next episode, I'm going to pull all of this together and give you my final verdict on the lens and detail a few more things about the handling and the performance, show you a lot more photos as a part of that. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, take a look in the description down below, because there you can check out the image gallery where I've got lots of photos that I'm continuing to add to as I shoot with the lens, and so you'll want to see those. And then of course, beyond that, you also can find some buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself, and all the linkage there to follow me on social media, become a patron, become a subscriber to my newsletter, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.